All right, guys, once again, we're going to be learning a lesson today, continuing with systems. Previous to this, we have done everything with linear systems. We're still going to be doing that, but now we're going to be introducing, like yesterday's lesson, you learned about just how to graph linear inequalities. Okay, so today we're going to go to the next step. I'm going to give you two linear inequalities, and we're going to graph those and find the solution for these. So that's why it's called a system of inequalities. Okay, so let's review real quick what you guys did yesterday. So let's review graphing inequalities. All right, couple things that you had to do. Let's think back. What was the difference between an equation or an inequality? Well, you should have noticed, and with inequalities, you would see these. Okay, these are the symbols. These are the four symbols of inequalities. Okay, the two over here, this is less than, this one is less than or equal to. Okay, you should know the difference between that because you have that extra line. And that's going to play an important role here in a second. Okay, the other two symbols are greater than or equal to. So this one would be the greater than, and this one over here is the greater than or equal to. Once again, extra line. Okay? So that should have all been a review. So every problem that you're going to see today, you will see these symbols. All right. When we graph these, they looked very similar yesterday. They looked very similar to graphing regular lines, correct? The only difference that we had to pay attention to was once we plotted our 2 points and we wanted to connect the lines with a line, connected the points with a line, you had to use a special line. So you had to distinguish which line you would be using. So these are the two different types that you would be using. So let's review that. If it is a less than, when there's nothing here, see how there's no extra line? It would be a dashed line. Some teachers call it dotted. Doesn't really matter. So this is how you're going to have to draw it on your paper. So if you have this symbol, it's dashed. If you have less than or equal to, when you hear that equal to with that extra line, remember this line right here, you're going to be using a solid line. Okay, so when I tell my students we have the solid line underneath, we're using the solid line on our graph. Okay, moving across, once again, if it's just a plain old greater than, no extra line, it is dashed or dotted. It doesn't really matter there. Okay, finally, finishing this up would be greater than or equal to. Once again, I said equal to. You have that extra line, so a solid line underneath, you do a solid line on your graph. Solid, solid, those would be dashed, okay? So that's what you learned yesterday. We are going to continue to do that, okay? Last thing that you probably got taught yesterday was maybe using the calculator to help you out to shade, okay? That is the next step. When we just did linear equations, do we have to shade? No. A line was good enough, putting on a line. This is not good enough when we're talking about inequalities. You have to decide how you're going to shade. So with that, if you have a less than, anything that is less than, or the less than or equal to on your calculator, you want to select the shape that looks like this. Okay, in the calculator, remember, how do we get there? Okay, so we have our calculator here. We would go to y equals, type in our equation, but you would have to scroll all the way to the left, hit enter to change that flapping arm, that's what I call it, okay? And then you would see, keep hitting enter till you see that. Do you see that blinking thing? That is your less than. So that would shade it correctly on your graph, okay? All right, so let's take a look at what if you had a greater than symbol. Once again, if it's greater than or equal to, you would be using the symbol that is shaded at the top on your calculator. So once again, what would that look like on your calculator? Okay, you would want to, once again, pull up your calculator. You're going to go to, sorry, I'll move it over here. Go to y equals, scroll all the way to the flapping arm. Keep hitting enter till you hit the greater than. So do you see the greater than symbol right here? Okay, it's shaded at the top. The calculator would do all the shading for you. Okay? So that's a little review. Another thing that I wanted to review with you guys, and you may have saw that earlier, is what's the big rule period, when we talk about inequalities, because eventually I'm going to give you two ways of seeing linear inequalities. I'm going to give you the SI form, and then I'm going to give you in standard form. So you're going to have to change standard into slope-intercept form. And you're going to need to use a certain rule. The rule that you should always remember about inequalities, it's like the golden rule. Whenever you multiply or divide by a negative number, flip the inequality sign. Okay, remember that rule. It's just, you should just know that whenever you see inequalities, that rule should be popping up right in your head. Okay, so we are going to see that for sure. So the next thing that I wanted to show you, okay, let me erase my board real quick, is we're going to go talk about the steps now. Once again, before I do erase this, is definitely write this chart down. I made it nice and organized for you guys. Put it in your notes. It's something good to have. It probably will help you through your homework and the try problems at the end of this video. Okay. Okay. So I am going to erase this, but if you didn't catch this, go back, rewind, and go ahead and copy that down. Okay. So let's continue on with the lesson. Let's start looking at some steps that I like to organize everything in steps. Okay. I like to have a way to organize my thoughts. So the first thing that we're going to do today with graphing in general is, one, we need to make sure it's an SI form. What does SI form help us to do? Well, that gives us an M and the B, and we're going to plot those on the graph. So I'll put that also underneath here. Then plot M and B. Okay. Normal ways of graphing. You should know that, guys, but that's always step one. SI form, plot MB. Okay. Then we're going to move to step number 2. And that's now the new thing with inequalities. We have to decide, how are we going to connect M and B? Are we going to connect it by a dashed line, or are we going to connect it by a solid line? So you're going to need to decide which line to use. Okay, solid or dash line. Okay. So that's step 2. Step 3. You are not done. I know this seems to get longer and longer, but you're not done. Step 3 is another thing that you did not see in linear equations when you graph those, which is the whole shading part. Okay, you're going to need to decide where to shade. Okay, and how do we go about doing that? Okay, so you guys learned this yesterday. How do we go about deciding where to shade? Okay, I am going to show you the 2 ways. One, by test points, by picking a point, plugging it in, and seeing if it's true or false, and then deciding where to shade, or by using the calculator. Okay, I will show you both, and then you can decide. Once again, it's up to you which way is easier for you. Okay, so how do we decide where to shade? We can either use A, test points, or B, the calculator. It's up to you. I don't really care. Either ways, you'll get the right answer. Okay? All right, so that's the basics of what we're going to be doing today with systems of equations, or sorry, systems of linear inequalities. So let's go ahead. In the next video, we're going to actually start to do this. We're going to actually start doing some examples of graphing systems of inequalities.